Alrighty, I think we're recording here. Alrighty. Greetings, friends. Juan Ingruski here, and today I have a very special guest. If you guys have been on my channel for a little while, it's a recurring guest. It is Endeavour, the man, the myth, the legend. Endeavour, how's it going?
Man, the myth and the legend, eh? Okay. Well, it's going great. Thanks for having me on again. Good to talk to you after it's been a couple of years. So nice to talk to you again. Thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, anytime. I've kind of wanted to get started into talk to I consider you a friend and everything. So,
Mhm.
and I think you have a lot of interesting things to say. So, you know, I think this would be a good conversation. And kind of for everyone watching, kind of the overarching theme, as you see in the title, is that we're going to be talking about how supposedly we live in the most freest society, at least that's what we've been told in the history of mankind, and we supposedly live in a liberal democracy with checks and balances and things that are supposed in a constitution that's supposedly supposed to protect us. But obviously, as we live in our daily lives, we see that we are increasingly becoming more and more authoritarian. And in some instances, we live in cases that the government has power that kings of old and dictators of old could only dream of. So I guess one thing I wanted to talk as we're both kind of more in that. Uh, I don't know how you would describe yourself. It's hard to like. I like the term
I
dissident
say
right,
I
but
usually just say yeah. I mean, people say dissident right. I know some people don't like the term. I'd say just broadly right wing.
yeah,
I don't really put like a label on myself. Just say broadly right wing.
yeah, and since we're both broadly right wing people, and not in the gay way of conservative ink or whatever, but like actual, uh, right wing, we kind of want to think about, well, how do we actually defeat this leviathan, this kind of big, where we see liberalism seem to be triumphant in every single major institution. How do we defeat it, and how come it's becoming not liberating us, but actually making us more down the road towards authoritarianism? So I wanted to get Endeavour here to talk about his opinion on it, and I'll chime in a little bit as well. But yeah, so I guess the first question is like, obviously, as we see around us, we're living in this, we live in a liberal democracy, allegedly, but we obviously have a lot more authoritarianism happening. So, in your opinion, I know this is a bit of a broad question. We could delve into any sort of way we want, but how do liberal democracies become authoritarian as we see, despite all the protections that allegedly it has against creeping authoritarianism?
Well, there's a lot of different ways we could go with that question. So I guess what I'd say first is that I think that liberalism should be more seen as a process, not so much an ends. It's kind of been made into this a good in and of itself, but really what it really should be is seen as is just it's a process. Things like liberal democracy, freedom of speech, constitutional rights, things like that, classically liberal ideas, and we are talking ideas, from the 18th century and so. We're not necessarily talking about modern day libtards. So we have to make the distinction between the philosophy of liberalism from the Enlightenment versus the modern liberal, which I even have criticisms of that philosophy as well. But there is a distinction between the two. What I would say is that everybody has. I guess my answer would be that everyone is religious in some kind of way. Everybody has something that is sacred to them. In the past, this would have been Christianity. Perhaps in the 19th century, it would have been the nation. Maybe with the communists, it was the idea of communism. And today, I'd say for the mainstream, what's sacred to the mainstream is that it's this egalitarian, universalist vision for the world, what we would call woke today. That's what's sacred to the political establishment today, and that supersedes the pre-existing liberal democratic system, which pre-existed the current order. So, what I'd say the main driving force behind it is that when liberal, traditionally classically liberal rights came into conflict with the woke agenda, the push for this universalist egalitarianism, it's clear that the establishment places those values above the values of classical liberalism. So, for instance, freedom of speech, that's a major aspect of liberalism and of liberal democracy, it's pretty clear that across the Western world, these governments are trying their hardest to crack down upon freedom of speech. And well, why are they trying to do that? If this is supposed to be a liberal democratic system, you're supposed to have this marketplace of ideas. Now, I don't believe in the marketplace of ideas. I don't think that's how humans. I don't think that's how human nature works. But that's what that's the idea. That's the idea behind it. Well, the problem is that the ideas which are actually winning out in the quote unquote marketplace of ideas are beating out the ideas which these people hold sacred. And well, they've decided that they hold these ideas a lot more, this kind of liberal egalitarian or universalist egalitarianism higher than things like freedom of speech, which is why they are now trying to pass laws which will jail people for expressing certain political views which are contrary to this kind of vision for the world. Another example is with democracy. Well, how many times have we heard the phrase "our democracy"? Well, what does "our democracy" really mean? What they mean is, again, democracy is supposed to be a process. It's supposed to be a process at which you arrive at a political conclusion through the consensus from the people, from the demography. That's hence the word democracy. It's something that's supposed to be apolitical. So, if people vote for something which is far left or far right, well, I mean, that's supposed to be the process. Now, I have many criticisms of this process, but again, this is what we've been given. This is what the system is telling us is our system of government. So it's fair to expect the democratic will to be followed, even if I have criticisms of the system itself. Well, when they say "our democracy," they're not talking about the process of democracy. They're talking about the outcome. They're talking about again, like arriving at the conclusion of this liberal this universalist egalitarianism, this of what we would call wokeism. They have that in mind as the outcome, and they think that when people vote for that, well, then that's democracy. But when they don't vote for that, well, then that's populism or it's racism or whatever. I mean, I'm sure everyone listening to this has heard all of these arguments before. I'd say that the main reason is because the powers that be today have put kind of their own universalist egalitarianism above classically liberal values. I'd also say that the other thing is that as a result of this kind of universalism, we've destroyed the conditions which were the conditions which would actually allow for a liberal society to exist. Because one thing with liberal democracy, which is presumed, is a shared vision of the good. So there's the idea is that when people are voting upon something, they may have different opinions. They may have a different opinion on what is the best course of action, but the goal is the same. The goal of the betterment of society is the same. But the problem is that we have today is due to things like demographic shifts and also due to hyper politicization as well. What you have today is that different people have different ends. So when you have a society that's ethnically homogenous, you can it's a lot, and then say religiously homogenous, linguistically, it's a lot easier for them to come to a consensus on the good. And liberalism works a lot. It works a lot better. So let's say you have freedom of speech. Well, people have the freedom to express what they think is the best for their nation, which has a homogenous ethnicity, same religion, same language, same culture, so on. People have the same. They have this shared conception of this is what this is the good. This is the good that we're after, and we may disagree on what the best course of action is, but we still have the same good in mind. But the problem you have with these Western countries, with the demographic shifts they've undergone in recent decades, is that we no longer have a shared vision of the good, which is why liberalism just doesn't work in that regard. You look at something like the U.S. election right now, it doesn't seem more like two different sides who may disagree on something but share a good. It feels like two warring. It feels like two warring nations almost, and it seems like it's this life and death struggle. I mean, when you contrast the United States from maybe 60 years ago with the Kennedy Nixon debate. I think that was the first televised debate, U.S. presidential debate from 1960. Both of them are, first of all, they're a lot more well spoken than the candidates than Trump or Kamala Harris or Biden or whoever. They're a lot better spoken. They're a lot more respectful to each other. And one thing that they even say to each other is that they believe that their opponent has the best interests of their country in mind, but they disagree with the way to get that. With today, we just have none of that at all. Like I'm Canadian, by the way, if anyone doesn't know, but my vision for the good is totally antithetical to someone like Jasmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP party, some Indian guy who's leading the third largest party in Canada. And to be honest, my vision of the good would be to have people like that removed from the country and deported. So there's no shared good that the two of us have. I mean, his good is basically to shut me down and have white Canadians subjugated and transfer power over to his own ethnic group. So what the conditions that have been created is that you just have this kind of like political trench warfare, and liberalism just doesn't work when you have that. Because people are going to be trying to shut each other down. Because why would you want to award your opponent freedom of speech? Why would you want to award your opponent somebody whose goal is to destroy you? You're not going to give them the. You're going to do everything you can to avoid awarding them the rights that traditionally would have been awarded by liberalism. So maybe a bit of a long-winded answer, but I guess those are a few of the reasons, at least, that liberalism is becoming a lot more authoritarian now. It's still on paper a liberal democracy, but I think that I hardly think that Western countries are becoming any freer.
You actually make a very good point. It's more of the ends than than the means, because one thing towards the end there, it kind of got me my brain noggin here about, like most things, like, we undervalue kind of those things that might not be explicit but are implicit. So for example, like the idea of a high trust society. If you have a high trust society, you could have someone who might be maybe a different political idea, might have different solutions to politics, but you trust them to try to, because everyone has this shared idea. This is, a lot of these implicit things, like being able to keep your door unlocked at night, or being able to I remember when I was hiking around in like Europe, and more of like when I was in like Denmark, for example, I was hiking there and I saw in the middle of like just town, there's like this little cutesy like aesthetic like bookcase. I don't know what they're called, but like there's books in there, and literally you could take it for free, and then they just expect you to either give another book back, or take the book after you finish reading it, give it back. Like literally it's based on an honor system. And I mean, like, there's a lot of these implicit things, and that we put a lot of emphasis on the explicit, but like there's a lot of these, in order to have this liberal democracy work, you need to have this high trust society, which we just don't have. But also, it's also the ends as well, because it's like, one thing I like thinking is, for example, when we're talking about, like, say, critical race theory being taught in school, everyone talks about, oh, we need to, we talk about all these education institutions, the universities and the public schools, teaching children and young adults about, how white people are evil, how Western civilization is evil, how there's no such thing as men and women, just all the woke Marxist trash and whatever. But we talk about how evil that is, but what's evil is not necessarily um is the idea of like like public schools or universities. Because if they were instead teaching kids and young adults, to love their heritage and loving their nation, and and things like that, that'd be perfectly fine. I want them to be, if let's say we were in control of the media and we had like a complete grip on shaping public will. I actually, if it was being used for good ends, that's what matters. I don't like, I don't care that the media could shape public opinion, because I like you, I don't believe that people are free thinking individuals. I think most people are sheep. I think most people just don't really give a shit and just like want to, or get their opinions from an outside source. So if you could implant them with like better, an actual good idea, then that's fine. But like right now, the media is obviously teaching them lies and complete all this woke stuff and all that. So that's what's wrong, is that the ends that they're trying to push are wrong. That's why. But that's why when we try to do it, I mean, I know it seems like, they're like, oh, you're hypocrites. Like, well, no, it's like, if we are getting what we want at the end, then that's right. Even if it, but if our opponents are trying to do it, then it's wrong. Like, I know people are like, oh, that's hypocritical. It's like, well, no,
Well,
because one
here's
side
what
is,
here's what I would say to that. So, I mean, I'm someone who needs freedom of speech. I need it because I have what are considered to be dissident ideas or marginal ideas. Now, I've never thought of my ideas as being particularly extreme, but suffice to say, they're outside of the Overton window. So, I'm someone who is actually quite reliant on freedom of speech. Now, I think that. What is the difference between what I'm doing versus what, like, say, someone like Robin DiAngelo is doing? Do you know who that is, by the way?
yeah, she's like I think she's the one who wrote the white privilege book or something.
Yeah, that one. So, like, what's the difference? Like, because I'll be honest, if I were in power, that stuff would just be banned. And the reason is because you actually have to put you have to just like with it's the same reason why they want to ban they want to ban our speech, is because they're putting their first principles being this, like, being wokeism in effect, that goes above the value of freedom of speech. Whereas for me, I'll be honest, I do put the well-being of our race, our people, my particular country, Canada. I put that above these traditionally liberal principles. Like, I would feel comfortable with somebody who disagreed with my policies but still had the same first principles in mind. So another person, let's say, someone in our political sphere, maybe I might get into a debate with them over what is the best course of action, but we still kind of share the idea that we're both pursuing what is the good of our people, our nation, our civilization. Where someone like Robin DiAngelo is just her good is basically the destruction of that. So, like, there's no we don't have any common ground with somebody like that. This is why, maybe this is a bit of a side thing, but the reason I think debates are useless for the most part is that for a debate to even be worthwhile, you need to have people who actually share the same common good. So they actually have to want the same thing. The only debate that there is to be had is what's the best way to get that. But then if you have two people who their vision of the good is totally antithetical to each other, no debate's going to be productive because these people both want each other's destructions. So I think that it's important to realize that the ends are more important than the structure around that. I mean, with me, I've been known as a critic of liberalism, and I spent a lot more of my early career on internet commentary talking about different forms of government, like monarchy or whatever else. For me, I guess the conclusion I've come to is that I don't actually really care what the system is, as long as it provides a stable, ordered, and healthy society. In the 19th and early 20th century, I think that in North America, liberalism did do that. It had problems. I'd say my biggest criticism of it was that it was easy to subvert. I'd say that was its fatal flaw. However, today I'm totally agnostic as to what the new system will be, which comes in to replace the current one. I mean, I'm more about is this actually able to? I'm more interested in its ability to deliver the results that I would like to see, rather than the system itself. I guess the problem with people like who might identify as classical liberals or centrists, they seem to put more importance on the process than on the actual outcome. And I mean, the establishment, the woke, the far left, they don't do this either. For them, it's about the outcome. The problem is that I think their outcome is evil and it's going to destroy society. So I want the opposite outcome of them. But I think it's important for people to look at the outcome and kind of be a bit more agnostic towards the system, which is going to get you there. Because it might be the case that we can't have liberal democracy in the future. Might be the case that maybe we are able to sometime in the future. Maybe this might be the next century. Maybe high trust, homogenous societies in the Western world are established again, and they find that liberalism is actually quite a good system for that. So I think that the most important thing is the outcome, not exactly the process to which you get there.
I mean, yeah, that's. I mean, exactly. It kind of reminds me of this meme. I remember I see on Twitter a lot. It's like this guy with like doing a presentation, and it's like, liberalism, but only for Anglos. And it's like, it's like the idea of, it's not necessarily like that. We're hard pressed against. Now, I do agree. I think there's some. I have some philosophical like. I think there's some like things that have come from liberalism that I absolutely disagree with, that I think have led to wokeism. I think they're, but I'm not necessarily that like I hate the idea of people being able to like have free speech, or the idea of people voting their leaders in. It's not like a principled objection to that. It's more of that there's some like like ideological, and I think you kind of touched upon it in the beginning of your talk, that there has to be a common narrative, and I think everyone is, if a lot of people don't, when you tell leftists this, they like shriek in terror, but like everyone is religious, as you said. And, you don't have to necessarily, everyone needs a reason why they exist, how they should act. Like, no one just like comes here, just, they need some sort of guidance on like how to structure the world. Cause, we're all born, we all come here. We don't know how we came here. We don't know what happens after we die. We don't know how to, everything is taught to us. And, we need to basically figure out how we center ourselves, and how do we see each other in relation to everything. And one of the biggest things I have, this just philosophy, is that your mindset of life literally determines reality, in the sense of like, if you think the world has to be a certain way, then you will act based on that like filter you have on reality. And one of the in the book that I wrote, or I'm trying to publish, it's not like out yet, but in the book I wrote, one of the biggest lies of liberalism is this idea of like equality between everyone, in terms of like everyone has to be equal. And, like there's like equal, when you come with that philosophical conclusion, like you have to defeat that, you have to basically deconvince people that that's like not an actual thing. Because like if you think everyone is born equal, then if you see inequality, then that has to be because of an injustice, because then that didn't happen naturally, it happened because of society. So, and that's how we see wokeism, because and that's why I think wokeism came from liberalism, because of certain philosophical constraints. So I think two sides is that, one, also like it's the ends. Obviously we both have like, we have a vision of like protecting our nation and protecting our people and our heritage and things like that, and the other side wants to destroy all that. And, obviously there's these competing, and whatever the ends are, what matters, and how we get there is doesn't really matter. But also there's like certain things I think lead to more, to this like snake. And it's not just like left, it's like this, I call it, I've been trying to like put a term to it. I call it an anti-human ideology, because it's not just like, I mean, it's obviously anti-white and anti-Western, but it's anti anything that makes us like individual, unique human beings. Like they want us to basically conform all of us into an unidentifiable biomass of humanity, that they could just, we're just atomized drones that they could use for, so, as like little ping pongs for their own little things. And like they don't, and anything that gets in the way of them being, you know making us unique, distinct needs to be eliminated. Your heritage, your religion, your family, your traditions, everything needs to be destroyed, and you're just some little consumer plaything that, for the elites to use. And so they don't anything, they just hate the idea of like, and it's like, beauty, they hate beauty and support ugliness. They hate order and support criminality. It's like literally anything that's like a virtue they have are against. It's, I mean, I'm not like, I'm religious, but I'm not like someone who puts religion on everything. But it is, I mean, if I had to say, I mean, it is satanic. I think, like, I don't say that in like, oh, I think Satan's behind it, but like, it is some sort, like, if I had something that like someone who just wants to destroy human civilization, like, I don't. The left puts a pretty convincing case that they are in charge of that.
Yeah,
So
like for example, like why do they worship Haitians? Well, it's because I like one thing I didn't end up posting this, but I was thinking like I feel like they don't worship Haitians because they think that Haiti is actually kind of good, that they're actually kind of good for society. It feels like they worship them because deep down they know that they're not good for society, and they kind of have this morality that the more antisocial, the more destructive some person is, then the more moral that person the more moral that person is. it's really strange. It's this total inversion of it's just this total inversion of what would have been considered good and just in pretty much any society which would have existed before the middle of the 20th century, really, maybe other than communism. But I mean, I don't think it's I mean, it does kind of sound a bit ancient to call it satanic or something, but I don't think that's totally inaccurate, though. Even if you don't want to put it in religious terms like that, it does just feel like this kind like a lot of them are kind of just on this nihilistic, suicidal path of destruction. Like a lot of leftists are like that. I don't want to say all of them are, but a lot of them are.
I mean, that's why I've been trying to find like a good term for, like, I know a lot of people say woke or cult, before it was cultural Marxism or globalism. Like, I mean, there's a lot, like, I know terms don't really matter, but like I've been trying to like get to that, like a certain, like, but like basically what we're dealing with is a bunch of nihilistic death cultists who, and not in a good, like, it's one thing if you just don't give a shit, and like nihilists do, but like they actually do, but the thing they care about is like literally destroying everything, like anything that's beautiful and good and orderly, and they want to like literally have an inversion of it, literally for everything. So, and that's why it's against Western civilization, but it's also like, I actually I was gonna post it again, like but I didn't. But it's a bit controversial to say here. But some people, a lot of classical liberals are like, I don't care about, I just want immigrants to assimilate in the Western countries. But it's like I actually prefer if they don't assimilate. Like I actually would prefer if most, like, first of all, they shouldn't be here at all. But if they are here, then I would actually prefer if like Muslims like were a bunch of fanatical like Islamists who like went on a terror rampage every once in a while. Like at least they actually have a unique identifier of themselves that separates them from like this biomass of humanity that liberalism is trying to destroy everything of.
Yeah, because the problem is that we would be absorbed into that.
Yeah, and so like they basically want to destroy everything. So it's like, I actually would prefer if the immigrants became unassimilated. Well, first of all, I want them all to leave. I want them all deported. But if that's not the case, then like actually, I would prefer if they didn't try to assimilate to liberalism. That's literally like the worst possible angle. But and when they say assimilation, they also just mean like supporting Israel and like gay rights and all that. That's what they mean. But yeah. So what's more important, I think, is like the ends. And I think this kind of leads me to another part of this conversation that I want to talk about is like, we talk about how, we've been talking about the ends, but one thing I think we also that's lacking in this kind of right wing community, we always talk about like the defects of liberalism, like the defects of the left, about how they're evil, and that's all. We all understand that, but like I think sometimes we lack like what's an actual articulated vision of what we want. We always say where we're against, but I very rarely see something that we support. Like what's an end goal? Like what should we actually focus on? Like in the left, they talk about, the reason why they're all doing this allegedly is to end oppression and all that. Like they have some sort of like cause, like as we mentioned before, they have some sort of like religious conviction. But for us, like I feel like we're kind of opposed to their, but we don't necessarily have something we're putting forward. What would you say is something that we should be like, if you were going to take, we talk about like trying to preserve the good of our society and our heritage and but like, what does that actually look like?
Well, what I would say it looks like is a ordered, stable, and prosperous society overall. One that is going to continue to be so in the future. So overall, it's a healthy society, and I think the way that you can judge the health of a society is does it actually continue to does it actually continue to be stable into the future and improve. And then also just I guess I would say the good of Western civilization and the good of our race. I'd say the flourishing of our race is my ultimate goal, and more broadly, it would just be like a long-term, healthy, stable society. That's in general terms what I'd say my good is, and I think that the problem, my critique of the vision that the left has for society is that theirs is a destructive one, and I think that bears itself out in terms of our race. I mean, you can look at the demographic projections, the birth rates, people's physical health, the culture that we create. Our now it's becoming our material wealth. So fewer young people can own homes now. Everything's more expensive. They can't have the quality of life which we had a couple of decades ago. I don't think that you can actually say, yeah, I don't think you can make the argument that things have actually improved. I mean, now there has been some improvement in things like, say, medicine and technology. Some of the technology I don't think is necessarily an improvement. So I don't want to say that there's none, but what I would say to people though is that sure, medicine might have gotten better, but as time goes on, everything should be getting better. So I mean, it's a good thing that now we can cure diseases which we couldn't cure 50 years ago. But then why is it that people have a harder time owning a house today than they did 40, 50 years ago? That's not an improvement. So, because they always do, they always pull this trick. The left, what they always try to do is they try to delegitimize everything in the past by saying that they have this kind of cartoonish vision of the 1950s. I'm sure you've seen those leftist memes where they have that picture of the 1950s family, and it said like, "Oh, the grandpa was a transsexual, and the father was beating his wife, and the boy was secretly gay, and the girl was coming out and the girl had polio, and oh well." I mean, I think the best response to it was like, "Oh, you think that your grandfather had a good life 60 years ago? Well, how can you explain this meme I made today about him being a transsexual?" But I mean, okay, so I mean that's kind of funny, but the point is that they use things like, say, medicine or whatever, like so let's say polio or smallpox or something like that. I mean, those were big problems in the past. Those are problems we don't have today. That is a good thing. That is something which has improved with time. But if like let's say that you had the project of building a factory, you were given this project of building a factory, and then like one year later, you've progressed on the assembly lines, but the walls around the factory, you have less progress than you had before. So like a year ago, the walls were three of the four walls were done, but now you only have two walls. Well, then how can you possibly consider that progress when, as time goes on, everything should be getting better? It shouldn't just be like only certain aspects. Everything should be progressing. Which I'd argue, like let's say between 1800 and 1900. I mean, there could have been a few things that were bad things which happened over that time, but overall, Western society improved greatly over that time period, and in almost every factor. I mean, maybe if you're a Luddite, you could make some arguments that it wasn't an improvement. And to be honest, I'm sympathetic to a few of those. But overall, there's an improvement. Well, then why is it that there hasn't been this improvement in the last couple of decades? Why is it that when I was growing up, all the families, both rich, poor, in between, all the kids at my school, they lived in houses. Almost all of them almost all the families owned houses. Now that we're grown up, I don't know a single one who owns their own house. I mean, that's not how's that possibly an improvement? I don't think it is. I guess that's what I mean. Because I kind of got a bit sidetracked about the original answer, but I would say, in terms of what I'm for, it's the overall flourishing of our race and our civilization, and basically just having a healthy and stable society which can carry us into the future.
And I think one thing that when you mentioned about those memes, it kind of made me remind me of the reason why they say that is because the idea of progress, like all the arc of history always bends towards progress type stuff. That's like one of the main things that they're like, okay, listen, I know we are, like we have to take total power because, but look, everything is going to get better, and because if everything's getting better, that's how they justify themselves to everyone. But like if you say actually no, they're like things have not gotten better, there's actually things have gotten worse, then that kind of delegitimizes almost their entire movement, because the entire idea of progressivism, progress, right? It's like, well, you guys have been basically in charge for the last, like for a long while, and the whole reason why you're supposed to be in charge is because allegedly you're letting us to be into a better future, but you're obviously not. And
I'll also add that when people on the right take these pictures from, say, the 1950s or something like that, or from the Victorian time period or whatever, and we see something in these which we like, and then the left is always there to say, oh, don't you know that people worked 12 hours a day in 1880 or whatever, or do you want to work 12 hours a day, or don't you know people had polio in 1930, whatever. I think that it deliberately misses the point, because nobody's saying that we're going to teleport ourselves back in time to whatever time period you particularly have a fascination with, because that's obviously not possible. What we're pointing out when we post things like that, it's that there is something there which has been lost. So nobody's saying that we want to have the medical science from 1880. We're not saying that we want to go back. We're not saying that we want to go back to the working conditions in factories and mines from 1880. What we're saying is that there was something there which has been lost in the process, and we'd like to regain that. You don't one trick they'll also pull is they'll also say that they'll try to associate genuine progress with the progression of wokeism. So they'll try to say that everything's better now because we have better dentistry. Therefore, you have to support transgenderism, which it doesn't logically follow like that. You don't need to have 100 different ethnicities in your town to have an efficient public transport system. In fact, on the contrary, it makes your public transport system a lot worse. You don't need to have transgenderism to have heart transplants. You don't need to have anti-racism to have heart transplants. In fact, it was do you know where the first heart transplant happened?
Yeah, it was in South Africa.
Yeah, during apartheid. Yeah, so these progressive values. Well, it certainly wasn't holding them back scientifically. They were able to develop the nuclear bomb. They were able to have, at least for the white population, had a world-class standard of living. They were able to have the first open heart. Was it the first transplant or the first open heart surgery? I think it was transplant. Yeah, first heart transplant. They were able. Sorry.
Oh no, I say yeah, I believe so. It was that?
Yeah, so they're able to do that stuff. They didn't have any of these liberal values. So clearly that there isn't this correlation between egalitarianism and science. You can point out other examples as well, like like Germany in the 1930s. I mean, it's a politically loaded thing. I'm not one to worship 1930s Germany or anything like that. I kind of find that irritating. People do it too much, but nonetheless, it was they had brilliant scientists there. They had brilliant technology. They had a lot of great generals in their military. Then it didn't end up winning them the war, but the point is that they weren't lacking in science, because they weren't lacking in science because of not being liberal. Even the USSR, again, of course, I think that this isn't to praise communism or anything, but they were able to send the first man to space. They were able to develop the nuclear bomb. Hell, even North Korea is able to develop these kinds of missiles. I'm not advocating these systems, but the point is that technological development, which has taken place throughout the Western world over the past couple of centuries, but it has continued. It's slowed down a bit, but we still do get some technological process these days. But it's a mistake to conflate liberal, egalitarian, universalist values with technological progress. I think that's just the system which happens to be in power now when these advancements happen. Like, I don't think that the Soviet Union sent a man to the moon because of communism. They sent a man to the moon because in Russia there were still many brilliant minds in the country, and they were able to pull that off. You look at a communist country like, I don't know, Angola or something like that. Well, they certainly weren't sending a man to the moon, and well, what's the difference there? So
they were too busy making Wakanda.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I think you actually make a very interesting point, because I think that's actually why a lot of people might not like obviously this aversion to true right wing ideas is because I think they do conflate, like, they're like, well, if you want us they mistake like, oh, now that we have like running water and like hot, and like hot showers and like penicillin and all that like that means like if we get rid of like transgenderism, that we'll get rid of that. Like it's like people can't think of a way that you could like you could progress, but you could be like progressing in areas, but like also degressing in other areas. And
Yeah.
like
I mean,
it's not like a linear thing. Like just if we get like they think that like we're gonna lose all our like we'll become India and lose all our toilets or something if like we stop letting children mutilate themselves or something like that.
well, to be honest, I think that Canada is already on the way to. They are still mutilating themselves, and they're becoming India as well.
That's true.
But yeah, like it's this conflation between technological advancement and I think that's kind of similar to what I mentioned with democracy. Is that democracy is a process. It's something that's supposedly that's really supposed to be apolitical. Now, I have criticisms of the process, but it doesn't necessarily. The ends are not really supposed to be. Well, okay, the ends are not predetermined to be universalist egalitarianism. It really is supposed to be whatever the people vote for. That's what it is in name. I mean, it's the same with technology, because the West has been liberal for so long, and then we've had this kind of post-war consensus, the one that we're living under now for the past 60, 70 years. And technological progress has continued during that time. And it's gotten us to conflate those values with technological progress, which isn't really correct. I mean, for example, the scientific revolution happened in the early modern period in Europe when people were pretty religious. So, like someone like Nicholas Copernicus, I'm pretty sure he was a priest. Someone like Sir Isaac Newton, he was a very deeply religious man. Now, I don't think that necessarily means that Christianity is correct. I mean, I'm not saying it's incorrect. I'm just saying like that these people were not. They weren't they didn't hold the values of the present day, but they brought about a great amount of scientific progress. So it's a mistake to conflate technological process with the political system, which just happens to be which just happens to be in power at the time, and it's a trick that's used to basically reinforce the status quo. So they say, well, you want you want ethnically homogenous communities again. You want high social trust neighborhoods where you speak the same language as your neighbor. Well, you want to bring back polio? I mean, it's ridiculous, but you hear it all the time.
But I also think besides technology, also like when we take the thorny issues like of the social, of the political and stuff like that, like let's talk about, the idea of like talking about how if we take ethnic, groups of human beings and say that on average, like they might say, let's talk about like, the classic debate of IQ, right? People think that if you discuss that certain groups of people have higher or lower IQ on average than others, that for some reason that means you're going to just put those people back into chains or something. It's like they have some sort of aversion to like if you talk like there are like taboo topics because if you start speaking about them, you'll like break the like like you'll go to this radical extreme. You'll become the mustache Austrian painter guy if you like discuss that people are different or something. So that's why you can't like that's why they are so against even talking about like say differences in like between like races, because like if that's something that if you take that to the extreme, that might you might have to set up an Auschwitz or something. And so I think there's like this like aversion to like that, like you can't talk about certain topics, and it's kind of like in not to conflate the two, but like like that's why there's like every society has something that's blasphemous to them. And like if you talked about, that's why like in religion, when you talked about say like evolution or something, that's a bit a thorny subject because it obviously contradicts at least the direct word of at least the beginning of the Bible. And so that's a bit of a more thorny topic. But but that doesn't mean that like just because you say study evolution, that means you're gonna like lose complete faith in God or something like that. But like the same thing with this talking about say racial issues or gender, like if you want to talk about the difference between men and women, that you somehow want women to like lose everything they gain. Now I think we do have to roll back certain things, but that's another question. But like that doesn't mean we have to roll back everything, like if we talk about men and women being different, so That's the
Yeah, there's an interesting story that I think it was with Jared Taylor. I forget who he was talking to, but he was trying to convince this person on race realism, and I don't know if anyone's better read on this topic than Jared Taylor is. But I think that when he finally basically got them, he said, I think that, and this was some liberal, and I think he was talking about blacks, and then this person said that, oh well, if this is true, does this mean that we have to kill all of them? And then he's like, when did I say that? No, I didn't say that. It's crazy, like the idea that, because this difference exists, well, that must mean that you're this genocidal maniac who just wants to wipe everyone else out. That's obviously ridiculous. However, I understand why liberals and leftists think that way, and I think it has to do a lot with the meta politics of the post-war era, where the big bad evil National Socialist Germany from the 1930s and 40s and World War II and concentration camps and all that stuff has just been drilled into their heads through pop culture, through education, so much so that the message that they're teaching is that any kind of consideration of racial differences, although it isn't even just that, it's just any kind of consideration of racial differences which would suggest which is favorable towards white people, then that's inevitably going to end in Auschwitz. I mean, there was this hilarious tweet from some libtard this week. It doesn't start with gas chambers. It starts with saying that immigrants are eating our pets. So the idea is that if you don't let an infinite number of Haitians into your country, and if you have any kind of criticism of their behavior at all, that's one step away from Auschwitz. You're on the road to just rounding them all up and then stuffing them into, which is, it's kind of funny, because if you just didn't let them into your country in the first place, why would you have any reason to dislike them at all? I mean, they weren't bothering me until they started to show up. I mean, when they were just in their own country doing their own thing. I mean, I don't exactly want to go live there, but they weren't bothering me. It's this hyperbole which they always use, and it's a way of shutting down debate. And it's really been it's meta politics which have done this. It's this constant like shoving in your face the crimes of the Nazis and of the KKK and of racist South Africa and apartheid, and it's just that this stuff's just been shoved in your face so much that people come to this conclusion. The idea that the message of this media, of the education system, is that if you ever have any kind of consideration when it comes to racial differences, well, then you're being just like the KKK, you're being just like the Nazis. And unfortunately, it's this kind of form of emotional blackmail, which is extremely effective. Thankfully, I do feel like it is losing its effect a bit, but for many decades, it has in effect made these topics untouchable. So when people like Charles Murray or Arthur Jensen or various intellectuals who discussed the issue of race and IQ, when they went to universities, they didn't have some person go to the university to debate against them and then deliver an argument that would debunk what they were saying. First of all, because they don't think they could do that. But secondly, they don't want to give it a platform at all. They physically assaulted these people. There were riots. There were maybe not riots, but there were like people that actually like tried to physically assault them, that tried to shut down people. I think there were stories of people pulling the fire alarms when there's a speaker they don't like. This hyperbole, kind of, that the left has they're always turned up to 11. It's a way of quashing any kind of discussion of the fundamental issues related to their worldview. So, because, for example, something like race realism, that basically, which, if that's true, which I'm quite confident that it is, that basically crushes the progressive worldview there. The idea that we can all live in this equal, borderless world as one humanity, that's just not going to happen, which is why they have to snuff that out and never let it see the light of day.
And some of this gets so like they're so like it's almost like, I mean, it's kind of ironic, like they're kind of so reactionary, if you could say, like to these ideas almost, that like their reaction to them, it makes it where they do like unspeakable like actions, like, when we see what happened like in Cologne in 2015. Sometimes, I actually used to be a Bernie bro back in like 2015. When that happened, and what made I never was like a full on leftist, but I was more focused on like the economic side of it. But I was kind of like in that anti SJW kind of like phase, and so I was a little bit exposed. But like what actually turned me over to Trump and started to see things in like at that time when the alt right was a big thing, was what happened in Cologne in 26 in the 20 New Year's Eve 2016. As you know what happened, like I mean, I'm sure
Oh
everyone
yeah,
knows.
dude.
Yeah, yeah.
Funny thing is that's actually the same story for me. It was the Bataclan attack and then Cologne. That was the moment where the hammer really dropped for me. But maybe you can finish what you're saying. I'll
Uh,
add mine afterwards.
Yeah, no, I mean that was the. I mean, I mean, we obviously saw like the Paris attacks, like, but before that, I was like, well, I'm against Islamic immigration because of they're against like gay rights or something like that. But like it wasn't like I never saw things in a racial way. I saw it more of like in like my kind of like a liberal way almost. But it was that, it was that, and it was also the grooming gangs in the UK. And what made me realize is that these people are so they the people in charge, the liberals in charge, are so adverse to like actually like prosecuting these people, that because they were afraid that it would help the far right, or that it would, like, if they actually mass arrested terrorists or like grooming gang members, that they disproportionately would be, or actually not even they would basically all be arresting like Pakistanis or people from North Africa and the Middle East. And since they were so adverse to that, like I'm like I mean, how like that's something you can't live, like they talk, like when they make fun of like countries and all that, like, oh, France, you surrender to the Nazi, which actually isn't really true. They actually fought very valiantly. But like, this is something that will, like, in like centuries to come, I mean, this is something that you would make fun of the English forever. It's like you at one point like let people literally groom your daughters, and you like actually arrested the people who complained about it. Like,
Yeah, I mean it's so tragic that I wouldn't even make a joke about it, to be
yeah,
honest.
I mean,
It's horrible. Yeah.
I mean, I mean, how, I mean, I don't, it's speechless almost. It's like how in the world do we even like I mean, there's people who like one little thing sparks like a revolution, and it's like, I mean, like, I don't know what else you would need to like fundamentally change like how can you have a system that is so adverse to like going against that so hates people who that love their country, that hates the indigenous people of that country, that they would rather see those people have their daughters like groomed and raped than actually prosecute the criminals, because they think the criminals are like, oh, they're they don't actually want to touch, they don't want to harm them. Like, I mean, that's such a sick system that, like, I mean, that all you have to do is just arrest everyone in charge and like burn it all to the ground, metaphorically speaking. But I mean, it's such a sick, like, people are so reactive to like thinking that, like, if you even acknowledge racial differences, or acknowledge that like human beings aren't equal, or acknowledge that like certain things about human nature that came from the Enlightenment aren't necessarily true, that like somehow like that means you're Hitler, and that the maybe people getting bombed by terror bombings or having their daughters raped is like a good price to pay to avert that.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the Cologne, the event on Cologne, New Year's Eve, 2015, and New Year's Day 2016, I believe it was. Yeah. Because I was in university at the time, and I remember that this was a few months. This followed the Bataclan terrorist attack, and just before that, it was weeks and weeks and months, rather, of the quote unquote refugee crisis. Remember that? About all these
Yep, I remember.
poor people fleeing Syria, just looking for a better life. I mean, we all know that now that was just like this media creation. It was basically just this way to funnel a huge number of people from God knows where, not even just Syria, but anywhere into Europe. We know that now. But I remember, because this was when I was I already like identified as a conservative at the time, but like, just a normie one, Con Inc. That was basically my political views at the time. And I just remember that in my university, like all of it, like for weeks and weeks, months and months, it was just like how any like insinuation that there's going to be anything wrong with just letting these people in. Oh, that's just racism. That's ignorance, and about how they're just great people fleeing for a hell that you have no concept of, and we need to open our hearts and embrace these and embrace them. It was this for months and months, and any people who said who criticized this. I mean, Donald Trump was the voice at the time. And with him, of course, I don't think Donald Trump is actually very genuine. I think it was more opportunistic on his part, but nonetheless, he did voice criticisms of this at the time. And I remember, so at the time I was in university in Toronto, Canada, one of the most liberal cities in the world. And for months and months, it was just that, oh, this is just ignorance, and it was about how, like, Orange Man bad, racism. But then the Bataclan attack happened, and it basically proved all the quote unquote racists correct. And then what was even more shocking for me, and this I'd say really was when I'd say this was probably the turning point for me. It was in the ensuing days and weeks after the Bataclan attack, when it went very quickly from being how this was a horrible terrorist attack and these people didn't deserve to die. And of course, they don't point out that they're Muslim or anything, but they're still like, that was only like that for a few days. And then within days, it was about how Muslims were the victims, that being angry about this terrorist attack was morally worse than the terrorist itself. So blaming Muslims for carrying out a terrorist attack was considered morally worse than the terrorists themselves, which is incredible. And I just remember that for weeks and weeks, the media was just going on and on about how great Muslims are, and totally burying the actual victims of the attack. And then lo and behold, a couple of weeks later, there was the Cologne sexual assaults on New Year's Eve in Germany. And again, the idea was that, oh, well, we wouldn't want the far right, we wouldn't want the racists to draw any conclusions. There's that great Norm Macdonald joke that he said, well, I'd hate for ISIS to get their hands on a nuclear bomb, and they might detonate that in a city in the United States. Just imagine what the backlash against Muslims would be if they did that. And which is, I mean, it's a joke, but this is actually how these people feel. And this moment for me, it was really when the hammer dropped that we're in a bad way, because it's not even just that there are all these Muslims in the West. And I know that the problem extends a lot beyond just Muslims. It's also Africans, and, well, in Canada's case, it's Indians. But migration and demographic change more broadly is the problem. But let's just say we'll stick on the topic of Muslims. What the hammer dropped for me, not the fact that there were these there were Muslims in the West. It was that all of the institutions seemed to back up these foreigners above the native population. It became clear to me that making excuses for the foreigners, for the migrants and those pouring into the West, that was more important than the safety of the natives. And it was pretty clear at that point that even if it were terrorist attacks, even if it were a greater degree of sexual assault, even if it were overall crime and everything getting worse, these institutions would still defend these groups above the native white populations. Now, of course, the Rotherham scandal had dropped before that, but I didn't even hear about that thing until about 2018. I know that was exposed in about 2014. But I didn't even know about it until like 2017, 2018, because it was never once reported on in Canada. I had no clue that it existed. But that one is the most shocking one, because kind of going back to the thing we were talking about at the beginning, how do liberal democracies become authoritarian? Well, what happened was that the reality which Britain had imported into the country came into conflict with the vision for society that the people ruling Britain had. That they had the situation where these Pakistani men were forming gangs and carrying out the systematic sexual abuse of white English girls. And well, that I mean that first of all, that's not supposed to happen according to the ideology of multiculturalism. They're all just individuals, and they're just the same as us, and that shouldn't be happening. And then secondly, it also contradicts this idea that well, the rules of wokeism is that whenever whites and non-whites come into conflict, well, whites must be the villains, and it sounds insane to any other era in history. This would just be utterly insane. But what the British establishment did was essentially ignore it, just full on ignore it, and in many ways actually punish people who were trying to prevent this, and just allow the perpetrators to just get away with it. And it's because they're just so devoted to this kind of vision for the world that they're even they'll even tolerate something like that, because they'll even tolerate something like the Rotherham grooming scandal and the similar scandals which happened across England. And then, I mean, what the thing with that is that when you put it into that in that way, you start to really realize that we're in a bad state. Now, I don't think I'm saying anything new for anyone watching this. I think that people already know that, but for me, like in the mid 2010s, like the hammer really dropped when I realized just how hostile all of our institutions really were.
One question I also that I've been kind of debating myself, and I'm going to posit it to you, is so one thing that brought me to even when the Cologne attacks happened, it was, yes, the event itself was shocking, but what was even more shocking to me was well, not as but like something that just maybe tip and maybe start thinking about, oh wow, there's something really wrong with our with our way of the way we're governed, is how the German government was trying to literally like just suppress it, that it never happened. Like they were just like literally suppressing that they were trying to say, nope, it never happened. You don't believe your lying eyes and ears. And that was the most shock. At that point, I mean, I was planning on voting for Bernie and things like that. I mean, even I though realized how shocking that was as someone even on the kind of more the left side of the political spectrum. But one thing the question I wanted to posit is that, are our rulers just simply are they, have you ever heard the term like the purpose of the system is what it does?
Yes.
And a lot of people I follow on Twitter, a lot of good people are starting to are thinking that our rulers know that what they're doing is wrong, but in fact, that's actually they're not, this is not like a mistake on their part. They're not like going like, there's two options. And I want to hear your opinions on this, because I'm debating it myself. Is it like these people, so on one hand, this is what I used to believe, was that they were so embroiled in this nihilistic liberal death cult that they didn't actually, they have this egalitarian liberal vision, and they were just blind to all the kind of like how communists didn't want to see the downsides of communism. They kind of plugged their ears and put their head in the sand. But same thing with liberals here, is that they don't want to see the failures of liberalism, and they actually think them having mass immigration is actually a good thing. They actually do think it will help people and they're doing a good thing. Or is it like a malevolent thing? They actually know that these people are going to make things worse, but it's like they actually don't care. They like the actual goal of why they're doing is because they hate the Western civilization and us as our heritage and our people and all that, and they actually are intentionally doing this to just inflict suffering on them. It's not incompetence, but it's malice. So I wanted to hear where do you stand? I've been kind of, I used to think on it was just them being so deluded in their nihilistic liberal death cult that they're just avoiding all the downsides of liberalism. But I'm starting to think that it might actually be malice. But I wanted to hear your opinion.
Well, I'd say it's a bit of both. Is it incompetence? Is it? I think there are three possibilities. Is it incompetence? Is it delusion? Or is it malice? So I guess if I wanted to define those, so incompetence is they just don't know what they're doing. They're just dumb and they're idiots and they kind of are bumbling around. delusion, it means that they genuinely believe that they're doing the right thing, but they're incorrect about what they're doing. They're kind of being carried away by their delusions. Then malice would be that they know what they're doing is destructive, but they're doing it anyway because they want it to be destructive. I think it depends on the person. I don't think there's one. I don't think there's one answer. So, for example, if I had to talk about the well, I don't know what I can say. I don't know what I can say on YouTube. If I were to ascribe the motives of the Levantine, the organized Levantine political community, I'll just say that people from the Levant, people from Israel. If I would say with them, it's mostly malice. Because you see with them, they have this very deeply ingrained persecution complex. They've convinced themselves that not just the Germans, but basically all of all Europeans have victimized them for throughout the centuries. That everyone is against them. And because their persecution complex extends further back than just World War II. By the way, with them, I find it's mostly malevolence. With them, there does seem to be this hatred and. Well, and the reason is because they're ethnocentric in their own regard. They're ethnocentric for their own group. Just look at the state of Israel. They support policies for themselves, but then they're advocating the opposite policies for us. That's malevolence, in my opinion.
Did you? Sorry to cut you off, but like, did you see that? Just something to quickly insert. Did you see they had this op-ed when Israel was doing their genocide in Gaza and all that? That the guy was like, I think the deputy head of their defense ministry, and he was like, he's obviously like destroying, he actually advocated that Israel should just permanently occupy Gaza. But then he's like, he's like, he wrote an op-ed with another libtard that said like, we need the West needs to embrace the Gaza refugees and help them. It's like, so he wants an ethno state for him, but he wants to push liberal idea, for everyone else. But
yeah, well, that's pretty typical. That's pretty typical of that ethnic group. With them, it's malevolence. It's a bit more masked, and then with a lot of non-whites, it's with them as well. It's just ethnic interests. So, like, let's say Indians, for example, in Canada, and like these Indian CEOs who always hire other Indians. They're just doing what they think is good for their own ethnic group. They're also very sadistic, by the way. But with Indians, they are very sadistic people. Like, they enjoy inflicting pain upon people who are lower than them in the hierarchy. I mean, a funny thing is with the Levantine community, if I can't use the name on YouTube, a lot of them, funny enough, actually, I think have just descended into just total nihilism, where they don't even support Israel anymore, but they just want this like nihilist destruction for everyone. It's just kind of funny. It's kind of like when you poison the well, sometimes that comes back to bite you. When you might poison the well to spite your enemies, but you still have to drink from that well as well. No pun. Yeah, you have to drink from that. You also have to drink from that well. No pun intended. But I also feel that there is a contingent who just genuinely believes that they're doing right, and that they're creating this egalitarian universalist vision for the future, where we're going to build John Lennon's Imagine. I do feel that there are a contingent of white Gentile elites who do believe this. I find that it tends to be the ones who are older. So old liberal baby boomers tend to believe this. And for a few reasons. One is that they've been shielded from the actual consequences of the ideology which they believe in, but also because they've lived like a stable, prosperous lifestyle. And many of them even actually lived quite traditional lifestyles. They still got married, had children, and they had their house in the suburb and everything like that. So there is a contingent which does genuinely believe that is carried away by their own delusions. There is that contingent. So I'd say it's a bit of both. I find with younger white leftists, including younger white leftists, a lot of them have descended into that nihilism a lot more. So with them, they are a lot more self-destructive. So I'd say that there was a bit of both there. I would say it's more towards the malevolence, but there is a bit of both. Now, I also think that some of these things kind of rub off on each other. So somebody who is this Machiavellian? Let's say it's a let's say like go back to the Levantine community. This Machiavellian who's trying to advance their own ethnic interests by promoting these kind of politics. A lot of times they do engage in self delusion that they then convince themselves that they actually are doing something good. That what they're doing is actually good. So they kind of start to believe their own propaganda. They start to believe their own bullshit. And then you'll also see people who are the genuine believers in the John Lennon imagined vision for the future. A lot of them end up just being absolutely vicious when they realize that they can't get what they want. They realize that their vision isn't coming true. So I'd say it's a mix of both, mostly malevolence, but the two kind of rub off on each other.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've been thinking is like, I mean, we always posit these questions and it's like, I mean, it's always like life is almost always not like, either or. It's a lot of times it's, both. Um, One thing I'm going to call it the L community from here on out, just to avoid
Okay,
censorship.
sure.
But no, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, we could use Levin, like, but I'm going to call them the L community.
Sure.
I actually was going to talk about now, obviously, right. One of the biggest things I've seen like right wing discourse about the L community is uh, is obviously like I think knowing about the L question and all that is it's something that everyone who is theorizing and talking about politics needs to be aware of. But I think sometimes you might overdose on it, and I think people who
That
like
is possible, yeah.
yeah, and I know there's people who yeah, ever since the when Israel invaded Palestine, they've become like third worldists, and I've seen a lot of people who have taken like who used to be very based, and then they're like, oh, actually, the whole reason why we have like racial strife in like America is because the L community is like secretly trying to pull us apart, and and then
They've overdosed on the JQ so much that they've become anti-racists.
yeah, no, exactly. No, I mean, yeah, no, exact that I mean, that's how it is, a lot of I mean, I really love Nick Fuentes. I mean, I think he's a great guy, but he was trying to like put a bunch of people and talk about Israel, and like a bunch of those people were like just these third worldist like leftist
Oh
brownowitz.
God,
Like,
I know what you mean.
yeah, and
I've gotten into some. I don't know if you've seen it, but I've gotten into some fights with these people online. Have you?
and I kind of think the L question is like kind of one of those like secret society, like someone like people who are like at the top of like our like the philosophical movement could have like talk about it and be able to like rationally discuss it. I But I think if you give it to like the average person, like they just so overdose on it, and they also like lose the plot. And I also think like I know everything we talk about optics wise um uh is like not good, at least in the current Overton window. But I think like when you talk about them, that like what you advance, like when we talk like say about like racial differences, that like trying to debunk the idea of equality serves our purposes so much more better than like talking about the L question, because like
Well,
I know we have to that's something that is important. I'm not saying it's like either or, but I think one of it is like a lot more like when people start embracing it like at least with the common people, they start seeing things that aren't there, and they like start like losing the plot, and it like
that
doesn't really advance things also like
yeah,
in ways.
like a great example of this is that during the pandemic, a lot of people said, well, because Israel is giving people these shots from Pfizer, well, it must be good because, well, they control everything in the world. And if they're doing it, well, then it must be good for us, which is obviously silly, logic. It's coming from the presumption that they control 100% of everything and that everything in the world is a conspiracy to benefit them, which isn't the case. Now, I would say that proportionally, they are the most powerful group, certainly in the United States, and I would say in the Western world more broadly, proportionally, because they're a small percentage of the population, but have a massive portion of the power. And I think it's undeniable that I don't want to say that every single one of them has been bad, because some of them are right, but overall the political influence coming from this community has been extremely negative, in my opinion. Certainly from the perspective of anybody who cares about Western civilization and the white race. I mean, it is pretty clear that they're influence has been negative. But here's how you have to look at this question. So they're a separate group who has group interests, and then we need to see whites need to start to see ourselves as a unique group who have our own set of interests as well. And if you look at it like that, that's how you can avoid where you can still take this issue seriously and discuss it in ways which are actually pertinent. And it doesn't get you carried away into all these like ridiculous tangents where you become this like third worldist who thinks that Muslims and Christians are going to band together to overthrow the Levantine, the L community, and they're going to create this, I don't know, like they're going to create this egalitarian world where we have John Lennon's it's almost as if they believe that John Lennon's Imagine is going to happen if we just solve this one, if we just solve the L community question. It's quite ridiculous, but the best way to avoid kind of descending into this into the kind of the conspiratard the conspiratard form of mindset is to just remember that what our goal is to pursue white interests. The influence of this community is antithetical to that because they on the whole pursue an anti-white agenda. So therefore that influence should be opposed. However, that doesn't mean that Muslims are my ally. That doesn't mean that Palestinians are my friends, because they're also anti-white. I mean, so that doesn't logically follow that because this group doesn't like Palestinians must be my friend because they're also anti-white. So I say to people, the enemy of your enemy is usually just another enemy. This idea that there's going to be this alliance against them, because the problem arises when this becomes the central part of your worldview. For anyone who cares about, for anyone, in our sphere of politics, the central point of the central aspect of your worldview should be what is good for our civilization, our race, and our society. That needs to be central. This other element, this is a factor which has contributed to the to many negative aspects. However, it's important that the end goal is not the destruction of the state of Israel. I mean, if Israel weren't influencing the foreign policy of Western countries, and we weren't sending billions and billions of dollars there, I'd be okay with them having their state. In fact, more power to them, because then we actually have some place to send them if we took over politically. But you shouldn't make them central to your worldview, because if you're somebody who cares about your own race, that is what defines what your conception of good and evil. The problem with people like this that become obsessed with this question is that their conception of what's good and evil is just whatever is bad for them. So they come to this conclusion that a bunch of like Iran or Palestine or basically they'll even show for like anyone who's just perceived as one of America's geopolitical enemies. The idea that by extension they're just helping you because this community is upset about this, and therefore if they're upset about it, well, it must be good. It derails the initial goal of pursuing what's actually good for us. Because let's be honest, if there was a nuclear war tomorrow, it would be really bad for the influence of this community. It would be really bad for them, but it would be bad for us too. So that doesn't actually really help us in any way. So I'd say go ahead.
Oh no, sorry. No, I actually have a very good kind of like a thought process I was gonna mention is there's a lot of currently I know a lot of the so-called far right political parties in Europe aren't really actually, because what actually needs to happen is zero migration and then total remigration. So that's like what needs to happen. But so I wouldn't classify the so-called far right parties of Europe as far right. But one thing I like thinking about a lot of those guys are also pro-Israel though. And are very Jew friendly, or sorry,
It's all right. I think it'll be fine.
L friendly and all that. And one thing I like saying is that, like, let's say I was like in the Netherlands or something, and let's say that this like based guy got into power who like closes the borders to the Netherlands and starts deporting all like the Moroccans that are there and all the and things like that. And but one thing is he's also pretty pro-Israel or something. I'm like, listen, if this means like if I was Dutch, and if the Dutch people are secure, like their rate, the existence of their civilization and their heritage and their people are protected, but in exchange the Palestinians are given more, are basically bombed more because the Dutch government gives more weapons to Israel, I'd be fine with that transaction, because what matters, as he's mentioned, you have to center. Like now, obviously, in an objective sense, the Palestinians should have their own state. The Jews should have create a big, beautiful wall between the two. But that's like ideally, but like what matters between Israelis or that's not what matters. What matters is your people, your heritage. You have to center that. And if that means and that's what matters. That's what you have to focus on. And it's actually a good way to, like, when you say you have to center it, and because then that kind of clears away all the bullshit, and you actually are able to focus on like what actually matters. And and one thing I like thinking about in terms of uh, the L question. Um, what was I gonna say? Sorry, I sometimes I talk and then like it disappears from my mind. Like, what was I gonna say? The well, oh yeah, it's one thing I like when I approach these questions is like, let's say, like for example, when I take power, if I was gonna take power, I would like mass arrest people in the media. I would mass arrest people in the universities. I would mass arrest people in the top of the corporations. I would mass arrest people in the government bureaucracy. Now, one thing I like thinking is that it's like, yes, this will mean that a disproportionate amount of Jews will be caught up in that, but I'm not targeting them because they're of their ethnicity or their race. A lot of people who will be being swept up will be Gentiles. A lot of them will be normal, Gentile white people even. But like we're doing a purge of this nihilistic death cult ideology. Now, yes, this L group is disproportionately pushing it, but that doesn't mean like when we cut everyone off, it's like we're cutting them because of the ideology, not because of they're necessarily because of who they are. It's not even anti-Semitism. It's like just as, for example, if we had to go after criminality, like we're going to be mass arresting disproportionately black people. That doesn't mean we're going after them because they're black. We're just understand that if we go after criminals, they will disproportionately be black. Just as if we go after the subversives and the people who are undermining our civilization, not all of them, and it's not just because of them, but there will be disproportionate amount of them in those people that we are trying to eliminate. So, I mean, that's kind of the way I approach it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, I would also say that it's important to kind of understand that they are a separate group and that who have their own group interests, which unfortunately have often conflicted with ours, and that for a lot of history they have held a grudge against us. So I think that is something that's important. That would be important to keep in mind. But yeah, at the same time, I don't think it's unreasonable to frame it in that way, to frame it in the way that you said. But I would say though that that the actions of this group and the way that they tend to operate, their entire mentality is something which does have to be taken into consideration, because it is very different to the European way of doing things. Let's just say.
I agree. I think that's something that does have to take into account. One thing in terms of like, when we try to approach this superstructure of like, obviously we see around us about how liberalism is the dominant form everywhere. There, wokeism or culture marks, or however you want to call it. It's in, all the media. It's pushed in all the mainstream media. It's pushed in all our universities and public schools. It's pushed in all the corporations and in the military and the government bureaucracy. So it seems like there's this titanic, everything is controlled by this ideological conformity. So one thing I've been wanting to do as a series on my YouTube channel, but like I haven't really gotten around to it, is I call it a deconstructing the deconstructors. Basically, like how do you just as like how they infiltrated, how liberalism infiltrated our civilization and and now we're going down this death cult. How do we manage to, like, how do we actually wrestle power away from them? Like, a lot of people think it's just electing someone, but it's not that easy. Obviously, like, a lot of people put faith in Trump. Now, maybe Trump never, like, I mean, is it just electing the right guy? I mean, is there like, what do we as individual people with free will are able to, like, do on, to actually confront this leviathan of evil?
Well, I mean, kind of as I said at the beginning, I don't think that a system's going to allow itself to be voted out of existence because, again, maybe democracy is supposed to be it's supposed to be something which is just a process, but we don't live in democracy. We live in our democracy, which, as we all know, the outcome is predetermined. The outcome is just more a more wokeism, the more destruction of our society. That's the predetermined outcome. I don't think that you're going to actually be able to vote your way out of it. And you might be able to get some better people into positions of power through voting. So I don't think it's totally worthless if the person is actually somebody who's genuine and not someone who's just going to mouth talking points and not actually enact them when they're in power. But I think that the way out is that you have. I mean, first of all, I have to say that I don't actually know because, well, if I knew how to do it, I'd be doing it right now. Or or do we even have the resources to? So that's the thing. I think that the answer is that you need to have competent, resourceful people embrace our ideas. I think that that's how things are really going to start to change. So when people who are well-to-do, people who have positions of power, people who have a degree of wealth, who are competent, who have big networks, who are influential, when they start to embrace our ideas, which you are starting to see some signs of that, that's when things will really start to change. And how exactly that will play out, I don't know. Nobody knows exactly, but that's really what will that's really what's going to bring about change. So for anyone listening, what can they do? Well, what you can do is either you can try to become someone like that, or you can, yeah. So either you can try to become someone in the elite class who is able to make change, or you try to convince people who are, try to influence people who are, or try to become one. So that's pretty much what I think people what can be done. It's when we get the people who actually do make changes, the people who actually are influential in society, when they adopt our ideas.
That's a good point. One thing I like to connect this with, like, a question I asked earlier with, like, how do we see, like, what's an actual good vision of our, like, what we're pushing? And we talked about, like, what's good for our society and what's good for our people and our heritage. One thing I like is, I like to, I know this is going to sound kind of a little off, but, like, I like seeing us as, like, pro. This is kind of going to sound like a bit like Elon Musk a little bit, and I'm not saying I'm, like, influenced, but, like, it's like I like to be pro human and pro civilization, like things that actually make us unique, amazing human beings. We're there's so much that make, like, that about our heritage, about who, things like family and our communities and our traditions. And if we, you know because, one thing I like thinking is that, it's not necessarily, again, the structure or the process that matters. What matters is the end goal, as we mentioned. And the end goal is that, can people, have a supportive family on a single income? Can they own a home? Can they self actualize themselves and not feel like an atomized, rootless individual? Can they have this sense of, like, a religion that tells them, how to behave and how to aspire towards their better angels? Is there something that inspires you to live, become more healthy? Don't become just a fat slob, but actually, you don't have to be this, a big, strong, athletic person, but, just someone who's fit, someone who creates order and beauty, someone who, we clean, we clean our, we have beautiful and clean streets, and, we get rid of all the criminals, and we have safe streets. We have a society that, you feel safe in. a society where we as individuals create those actual small moments in the local, because that's what matters. Because one thing is that I think is that we're trying to not achieve utopia. Because I think even if we create everything, if I was in power, and this can, a lot of political leaders aren't supposed to say. I'm not saying I'm a political leader, but like I would say, like, listen, if I'm in power, even if I got everything I wanted, there's still going to be problems because that is just human nature. You will still have disagreements, and there's still going to be sadness. Like the way out of like is not found in politics. Politics is not going to like solve like every single issue. Now it could alleviate a lot of things, but like what actually matters, what actually will make a good life for individually, but then also we're talking about saving our civilization. But what actually in what can people do, I think, is like at the local level, at this what actually have those strong communities, have those strong families, have those strong friendships and brotherhoods, and create beautiful things and create order and stability and the things that we actually profess to as virtues, and live that as in your life, and then live it with everyone in your neighbor in the local area, and come together with common-minded people, advocate for the issues. And obviously one person doesn't change, I'm not, one person isn't going to change it. But if obviously even when things seem totally, everything's, when all of society seems against you, at least if you because what actually matters is that even if we win, even if we take total political power, is that salvation and happiness is not going to be found in the right political person being in power. Is going to be found at that local level where you could have identity and order and tradition, and have that, hey, I'm part of I'm not just an atomized consumer. I'm an actual person with worth who is part of a great heritage, and I'm proud of that. And I could continue my heritage, and I could, self-actualize myself and have free, honorable freedom, and also just be able to have a family, be able to, and everything like that. So I think that's because that's ultimately, I kind of connect those two, like how, what do people, is, you could do that right now, is like try to, obviously right now a lot of the things that used to make that easier in the past, things that people just kind of took for granted, they didn't have to intentionally seek it out in the past, it was kind of given to them. But it's still, you're still able to build those bonds, because that's what happens, is what actually matters is that organic local human level. That's where actually the magic of life and civilization happens. And I think that's actually what ultimately matters. It's not utopian, it's a real concrete human thing. I'm not saying you're going to always be happy, but you could find those moments where you could be great, and and feel content, and feel pride about who you are and your heritage, and feel safe, and everything, more so than what our current system produces. Sorry for the long rant, but that's kind of like how I like to see it.
No, I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and let me see if there's any other question. I think that's a lot of the one thing let me see. Oh yeah, and so yeah, I have two more things that I want. So you mentioned like earlier, we're talking about like kind of the processes about, we obviously we're talking about how um it's the ends, not the means. And but you also said that like even if you have like a bit of a you're again, in terms of like democracy or the marketplace of ideas or some other like liberal idea, you could also talk about. But what can you explain also, like what you're more of, like why you think those, even those processes, even if they led to, let's say, like why you think those processes are not like, even in their essence, not exactly the right thing to pursue?
Well, for example, the marketplace of ideas. The problem with this is, and in this one, I do want to separate my criticisms of Enlightenment liberalism with modern day libtards, because it is a different thing. But I have criticisms of both. The problem with the marketplace of ideas concept is that it if it mistakes human beings for being these rational, calculating, utilitarian robots, essentially, who are going to listen to arguments and consider their validity, and then come to the conclusion based on the evidence which is presented to them. That's just not how people work. You go to I mean, like the example of race realism, you can have all the facts in the world. You can have every single scientific fact which has been uh, every single every single study which has been done into this, every single argument imaginable. You present that to a lot of libtards, and they're just gonna call you a racist, and then they're not going to be convinced, not because you didn't state your case in an effective way, but because their first principles basically tells them that what you're preaching is evil, and therefore they'll just reject it outright. Uh, that's why the marketplace of ideas just doesn't work. The first reason is because it doesn't. The first reason is because people aren't these rational beings like the Enlightenment envisions them to be. Secondly, it's because power is a lot more persuasive than actual truth, unfortunately. I mean, how many lies are there which exist, which policies are based on in Western society today? I can think of countless ones, like affirmative action, for another example. Because it's based on the lie that the reason white people are more successful is because we're cheating, because we're oppressing everyone else, and that because our societies are racist against others. That's why we need affirmative action. Now, that's a lie, but that policy has won out, not because it's based on truth, but because it's based on it's because that was backed up by people with power, because people with power wanted that to happen, and they were able to make it happen regardless of what the actual facts were. I'd say that, in relation to democracy, it's actually very similar. The idea, it also in many ways is based on the idea that people will have these rational debates, and that the objectively best course of action is going to arise, and that the majority of people are going to decide upon this, and that that democracy will always yield the best net outcome because of rational debate, and because the most correct argument will win. It just doesn't work like that. It just doesn't work like that either. I mean, you can think of lots of examples from history of people just voting for things based on something like just like the last name of the person. Like, for instance, Napoleon III. Did everyone in France in the middle of the 19th century, just after they were given universal male suffrage, their first election, did all of them just decide upon this guy as like, well, this guy's, I really like his policies. I really think that I really think he's gonna do good for France. Or is it because he was Napoleon's nephew? It was the name Napoleon. They couldn't turn that down. It was the name. People in democracies make decisions based on things like this. Like, another example is, like, there are these studies which show that somebody will go along with something they know to be incorrect, just so that they're not seen as an outcast. So how many times have you had it, like, where people are voting for something, like, it could be anything, it could be like what sport you want to play in gym class or something, and maybe 2/3 of the class raise their hand, and then the other third kind of just look around, and then they just raise their hand too? Was it because if they had done a private ballot, would they have agreed to that? Or is it because they kind of just saw that everyone else was doing it and they did it as well? That's another thing with democracy, is that there are all these, like, irrational influences upon people, which will influence the decisions that they make. They're not these calculating rational utilitarian robots like the Enlightenment seems to make man out to be. So there are a lot of flaws with liberalism at its root. So I think that the system we're facing today, it's not exactly flaws with liberalism at its root, as in so much as it's flaws with kind of this worldview which has emerged over the past century. But there are many flaws with liberalism itself. And then I guess also another thing would be that this isn't so much a problem with liberalism, but you have to also remember that it was developed in a Northwestern European Christian homogenous society. That's a society which developed liberalism. And if you don't have that anymore, well, it's kind of foolish to think that it's going to work all the same. And you can even look at other countries like in Africa or whatever that have had liberal constitutions given to them by the West, like after colonization, these liberal democracies were set up, but they've all failed because they don't have the that's not of their civilization. That's not it's something which they don't have the preconditions for that to actually make that work. I mean, I guess, are there any other concepts from liberalism you wanted to ask me about? Like, are they wrong at their root? I can think of a few. Yeah.
I would think one thing I wanted to also kind of like is, do you think like what like philosophical, like, I the one thing I always focus on is like the, this idea of equality, because I think that's like one of the main reasons we see wokeism today. I like one thing, for example, I read, despite him being looking like a complete beast and all that, like and I mean that in like an ugly way, like this guy looks like a complete ugly deformed person. But Richard Hanana and all that, he wrote a book about why he thinks wokeism happened, and he talked about like the various civil rights laws. And yes, that's one reason why companies talk about um have all this like disparate impact and things like that. But like, why was disparate impact written in that law in the first place? Well, that's, as we mentioned, it's because of their idea of equality. And there's a disproportionate inequality, then it has to be because of a societal thing, and not because of a racial or like an individual thing. But so we talked about equality a lot, but like what are, like, just like in your opinion, like other like kind of concepts that have led, because there's a lot of people who think that, like, well, the reason why we can't go back to like the liberalism of like the 60s or the even the 90s is because like the seeds are ready for like this kind of like this woke death cult that we see today already arose, and just going back just means, without cutting out the stem of it, would make them come back.
Well, not only that, but in order to go back, you'd have to be far right to
Yeah.
do it. So you'd have to like to get the 1990s back, you'd need the 1990s demographics back. Well, how are you going to do that without being far right?
Exactly. No. But like like, in terms of like kind of these like ideological poisons, these like root and stem things.
Well, I
Like,
guess,
do you have
I
any of
mean, I
those
don't
that you
think
think?
that like with liberalism is more about equality under the law, which to be honest is not a bad concept. So if anyone doesn't understand what that means is that it doesn't necessarily mean that people are equal as individuals, that they're equal in their potential, but it means more is that they'll be treated equally under the law, and that the same laws apply to the same laws apply to everyone. I don't find there to be that much of an issue with that concept. And it is also worth remembering that classical liberals from the 18th century and 19th centuries, like, they were legitimately racists. Like, they were, I mean, not that I'm not saying that in a disparaging way. I'm not saying that as a moral condemnation of them, but like, liberals of that time period, they believed in things like race realism because, many of them believed in empiricism, and this is what the empirical evidence showed them. I think that I think that the whole like race denialism is more of a 20th, 21st century thing, though you can kind of see that in something like John Stuart Mill, or sorry, not John Stuart Mill, John Locke, the blank slate argument. A lot of that can arise out of that. I think that's a big problem with liberalism, because I think that there's a problem that it puts too much faith in in human institution, that you can create people through education, through just having the right institutions in place. Is going to bring about the perfectibility of man, because it does seem like liberalism overall sees humans as good in nature, which I don't entirely agree with that. I'd say the other one is individualism. Now, I don't necessarily have anything wrong with people being upstanding individuals or anything like that. I don't have anything wrong with their existing rights of the individual. So, things like the right to a fair trial, I think, is a good thing. Things like the right to property, to life, liberty, and property. I don't think those are bad things. But the problem is that it's when you break society down into the individual that this becomes the most important thing. The problem is that a lot of times the good of the group actually comes into conflict with the good of the individual. And in my opinion, I do think you'd have to put the good of the group. There needs to be some kind of duty that the individual has towards the group. I don't think that the individual is really. I don't think it's a good way to look at society as just a collection of individuals. There has to be like a conception of the broader of the broader of the broader community, of the broader ethnic group, nationality, whatever it is. I think that one flaw with liberalism is that it seems entirely focused on the individual and often neglects the benefit of the group as a whole.
I actually agree with that like 100%. I actually like a lot of these ideas from liberal. I actually think like for example the idea of the rule of law, like that you mentioned, is like I think one of the greatest things ever. Like the idea that like what we're actually no matter even if you're born rich or powerful, that you can't just murder someone in cold blood just because you're born to an aristocratic family. It's like you're given a lighter sentence. I know even in liberal countries like that still there's allegedly we have no corruption because we renamed it lobbying and all that. But I mean there's but the I know it's not perfect, but like the at least the aspiration of like I do think I mean that's a really good just because you're born to the right family doesn't mean that you're immune from like having to be I call it like the rules of civilization. Like you're not excluded from that. You have to be
Yeah.
abided by that. I think that's
Mhm.
a really great thing. But I think there's like I think it's a lot of these philosophical things that like again as you mentioned like the idea of like this rational individual or the idea of like individualism itself is like the or which kind of is the ultimate goal, like individual rights or and that doesn't mean like that individual rights aren't a thing or that it's just that I think as we mentioned it's less about the process and at least we should focus more on the ends. Like so for example when it comes to for example like individual let's talk about like individualism versus like this group identity. I mean we obviously it's like it's less about like oh like it's not like collectivism versus individualism because it's like it's not like the individual has to be completely subservient to every single group action, but that what it means is that individuals aren't just lone man islands. Like they
Mhm.
need they're connected and they have a heritage and they it actually benefits individuals to be part of that kind of group. That's actually I think why wokeism has become so powerful is because people have lost that sense of identity and they're trying to find that in another sense, like have another cause. But like like that doesn't mean that I'm against like individual freedom, like or that it's just that I don't put that as like triumph over everything. Like if like if you want to like I mean this is a bit like this is just me being more libertarian, but like if you want to like I don't know like do if you want to drink or even like I might be a bit more open to like legalizing marijuana or even but like if you want to do that, okay, we could have a debate on that, but like I wouldn't say that you have a right to like we see this in like I think Canada did it, but I know for example like Portland did this where they like literally just decriminalized all drugs, like you could
Yeah,
just smoke
it
crack
happened in
cocaine and
Vancouver.
heroin. Yeah, and it's like, well, what happened to like like okay, maybe obviously like in an ideal society nobody would do drugs, right? But like okay, if you want to drink alcohol or something like that, like or smoke maybe weed even, like okay, we could have a debate on like like where maybe having that doing it at your home, maybe that doesn't harm people, but like obviously that shouldn't be like the main focus on everything. Obviously it's like okay, like if you want to start like just smoking crack cocaine or injecting yourself with heroin, it's like okay, we're gonna infringe upon your so-called individual rights because the right of people not having to live around a bunch of heroin addicts, overdosing on the street triumphs your right to take it. And
Yeah,
so
exactly. Like this is one thing, one concept I really do hate is like this idea that you're free to do everything you to do whatever you want as long as it doesn't impact other people. Well, the problem is that with that is, well, are they free to do crack cocaine? Well, then that's this person's individual right to do that, and they're not affecting you. You're not experiencing the health effects, but they really are affecting you, because now you're going to have a bunch of crack addicts like on the streets of your town, and then you're not going to be able to be safe when you're on your way to work or when your kids are on their way to school. That does impact you, the society more broadly. Like, let's say something else, like, I don't know, something like OnlyFans, or one of these like poisonous, one of these poisonous like internet sites with these very exploitative, sexualized sites. Now, are these sites badly impacting me? Well, not me as an individual, but they are overall decreasing the overall quality of society, and you actually have to live in the society. Therefore, it is actually impacting you. There are lots of examples you can come with. Like something I haven't spoken about this so much, but it's something I've kind of become very passionate about. It's with food and about healthy living. So
Yeah.
is it impacting me if people can get this massive order of fries and this 2-liter Coca-Cola and this triple burger at McDonald's? Well, it's not impacting my physical health the way it's impacting theirs. But the problem is that overall society is becoming a lot less healthy as a result. So, like, first of all, you have to have there's a medical system which has to now has to deal with all this. But overall, like, it's much more difficult to actually have like a physically healthy society if all of this stuff is allowed. Like, one thing that drives me up the wall is that you go to the grocery store these days, and if you want to buy canned vegetables, you have to look at the package to find which ones don't have sugar. And I found that some brands, they'll now have it written on the brand, and it'll say no sugar, and it costs more than the standard one, which has sugar in it. So technically I have the choice to spend more money and buy the one with no sugar in it because I want to be more healthy. Technically these companies have the right to sell whatever they want as long as it's legal, and technically people have the right to buy the one with all this sugar. But the problem with that is that it overall creates depreciates the quality of the society overall. And as someone who has to live in who actually has to live in that, it does affect you. It might not affect you physically or directly, but it does indirectly. And and I find, like, I don't think that people I do feel like people before the later half of the 20th century understood this, even as society was liberal. But they were liberal arguments which were used to push this stuff. And it just kind of acts it just kind of negates any kind of it negates any kind of possibility of creating a healthy society, because it just makes you totally incapable of actually addressing societal problems on a broader scale.
One thing I made a point about this, but I said that the more conservative your society is, the less authoritative your government has to be. One thing I like saying about this is that there's a quote from like the founding fathers from America. I believe, forgot which specific founder said it, but he said that our Constitution is only compatible with a moral people. It is incompatible for anyone else. And the thing is that this is why I think it's important about pushing the right value system, and giving people, when we control. This is why I don't think it's a bad thing about controlling the media or controlling what we teach people in public schools, because if you teach them the right things, then like, for example, when we talk about people who are a lot of these conservative values we want to have in our society, if you, like, for example, with, like, let's say Mormons or something, like, I mean, they have a higher I think their birth rate's like actually above replacement. I think Mormons have like a 2.6 something birth rate, which is a lot higher than and it's not because they're forced to do it. It's because they have a culture that they intentionally, and they're like, they put a very big value on what they, for families. And they also have, like, for example, they also avoid like alcohol and, I think fast food. I'm just using them as an example. I'm not exactly sure about the religion, but I just know them a little bit. But like they, they avoid those things. And so if you have like a value system that puts an emphasis, say, on health instead of like convenience and hedonism, then you will naturally see people. You don't even need a government mandate. You could like have a cultural. Now, I don't think everything is about. I think there needs, there still need, like, just because you might have a culture that disincentivizes violence, but you still need to have laws against murder, for example.
Yeah.
But
How many people were being fired from their jobs for their political views in Victorian England? Was anybody's bank account taken away in the 1930s America? Like all of these. Did they have I mean, mass surveillance, part of that's technology, but all these like authoritarian measures, they're in many ways required because what the people in power want is impossible. They're trying to create a world which is impossible. Therefore, they have to become more and more authoritarian in order to do it. Whereas if you actually just allowed the natural order to play itself out. Now, you would still need to have authority. You'd still need to have laws. You still need to have laws and law enforcement and everything like that. But they'd have to actually do a lot less. They'd actually have to interfere in people's lives a lot less than they do now, because you're just kind of allowing the natural order to play itself out rather than trying to socially engineer some utopia, which is impossible.
Yep, and I mean, that's the whole thing. And I think, like, in terms of this balance, is that, what we need to focus on, like what actually continue advocating for our people, our heritage, our civilization, and then focus on like what actually matters, like, at the local organic level, and focusing on what makes us great, focusing on the good virtues and then just living them, and then advocating that being government policy, because people who have good values are people who, I mean, I know this sounds like kind of like talk, kind of like a bit out there, but like people who have good values are able to actually govern with the right way. And that's why the people who have bad values, as we see with our current liberal overlords, when they have values, they allow things like grooming gangs and the clone sex attack. So when you have people who have the right values in place and who center the right actually matters, we actually have we can actually have a good life and a good civilization. So I think that's those are all the questions I have written down. I thank you so much for being on. I really like this conversation and everything.
Well, thanks
Um,
for having me.
yeah, and if I'll have you, if for everyone who's watching, you guys, I'll have Endeavor's channel in the description and also in the comment section. Is there any other last thoughts you want to say
No,
before?
not really. I think we covered it. Thanks again for having me on, and I'll do it again sometime.
Awesome, yeah, and I'll definitely keep in touch. Alrighty. Alrighty, everyone. Well, that's the end of this recording, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. And be sure to subscribe to my channel. Be sure to subscribe to Endeavor's channel. Give this recording a thumbs up and comment your thoughts and everything like that. Alrighty, take care, y'all.